Welcome to this class. Today I'll be talking about inspection, receiving, and acceptance. This is a very important exercise in any organization. So after goods have been received into the organization, they must always be received, inspected, and accepted by the acceptance team. So the entire process of the supply chain management has one of the main objective is to obtain value for money in the organization. Inspection and acceptance of goods, works, and services is the final action of the procurement cycle. Inspection, acceptance, or rejection and receipts of goods, services, or works is used where the contract management committee are not used. It is normally commonly used in situations of one-off, whereas contract committee is used in a continuous situation. So whether it is a one-off or continuous process, the objective is to conform or confirm the conformity with the following. Number one, if what is supplied was actually lawfully ordered. So if what is coming into your organization was actually ordered. Number two, that the quantity supplied is in the right quantity or part of supply, depending on the nature of the requirements and condition of supply. It also checks in order that the delivery has not been made within the time required, or if supplied in parts, then the timeliness are complied with. So they also need to check the delivery time and if the goods were supplied according to the agreement when it came to the issue of time. It also checks whether the right quality inspection will always involve comparing receipts with the specification. So the organization will be able to compare what has come into the organization and the specification that was developed. This exercise requires relevant technical know-how. In some cases, even in laboratory testing becomes necessary. So sometimes you might be forced to test items, more so items like drugs or chemicals that are very critical in the inspection. You also need to check the expiry dates. It is the role of the inspection and the verifiers to confirm the date of expiry and the expectation consumption rate. This will help in determining whether the supplier will be used within their useful lifespan. So the essence of checking the expiry date is to confirm whether that item will be used for the better part of the organization. Then hence, even though the supply may meet the required specification, the usefulness may be limited by time. Then the other thing is that the issue of expiry dates may be addressed in a number of ways. Number one, in some countries, expiry dates must be indicated on the product. So for example, when you walk into a supermarket today, you realize that all items have an expiry date. That is the validity of the items to be on the shelves. So it is very, very critical. Whether that does not work, laboratory testing may be used. So sometimes they can use laboratory tests to ascertain the expiry of the product. If considered cumbersome or expensive, the manufacturer or supplier may be required to give a guarantee. You can also attach a guarantee indicating that the goods are in good condition. So the procuring entity has the following responsibility. Number one, to ensure that all the above dimensions are adhered to before accepting the goods or any delivery from an item that has been procured. So they must ensure that everything adheres to what was really needed by the organization. Every procuring entity conducting a procurement should ensure it selects an inspection and acceptance committee. So there must be an acceptance committee, which their work is to ensure that they check the issues of quality and the issues of the quantity of items that come into the organization. The committee is also composed of a chairperson and two other members who are appointed by the head of the procuring entity and usually recommended by the procuring unit as provided in the public procurement regulation. So the accounting officer of the procuring entity is solely responsible for appointment of the inspection and acceptance committee. It should also be selected on a timely manner so as to avoid unnecessary delays. This committee is usually different from the contract management team, and the work of the inspection and acceptance committee comes after the goods, services, or works have been delivered to the organization. So what are some of the duties of the inspection and acceptance committee? Number one, they inspect and test the goods, works, or services delivered where necessary. If the goods require testing, it is the work of the inspection committee to ensure that they do that on behalf of the procuring entity. They also ensure that goods, works, and services comply with the set specification. So they must ensure that what comes into the organization was what was highlighted on the specification that was developed. Then accepting goods, works, and services if they meet the specification and rejecting them if they do not meet the specification required. So they either accept or reject the items if they do not meet the specification. They also ensure that the correct quantity of goods, works, or services have been received. So the quantity is very critical when it comes to inspection and acceptance. So you must ensure that what you really ordered is what has been received, making sure that the goods, works, or services meet the required technical specification. If those goods are technical in nature, they must ensure that they have been able to meet the technical specification. They also ensure any manual or documentation that needs to be delivered alongside the procuring of goods, works, and services has been received. So their work is also to ensure all that is possible. And the other function or duty is to make sure that goods, works, or services have been delivered or completed on time. If there are any delays, they should be noted. And lastly, they issue completion or interim certificate of goods delivered, the delivery notes in line with the terms of the contract. So issuing completion, they normally issue that to ascertain that the goods indeed have been delivered to the organization and they're in good state. So the process of inspection, receiving, and acceptance of goods. Number one, the inspection and acceptance committee can inspect the goods, works, or services at any place or any time, like during construction, during manufacturing, before shipment, and during the delivery. They can also inspect subcontractors of vendors and they have their own quality control technique to check compliance of the goods, works, or services. They can as well engage an independent party to carry out the inspection, especially technical inspection, where they lack the capacity to do so. The committee has to make sure that all the goods, works, or services undergo proper inspection before they are accepted into the organization. The other thing is verification may include, but not limited to, A, they must check whether the goods, works, or services meet the defined technical specification. B, the quantity expected has been met. Quantity is the value in terms of quantity or in terms of the number that is required in the organization. They also check whether the goods, works, or services meet the expected quality. And remember, we said quality is fitness for purpose. They must ensure what comes into the organization is fit to be consumed by the various user departments. They also ensure that any documentation or written manual that need to be accompanied by the goods, services, or works are received. And lastly, they ensure that the goods, works, or services are delivered and completed on time. How do you treat partial supplies? Sometimes you realize the suppliers do not bring all the items that were required. So how do you treat them? So goods, works, or services may be purchased in bulk and be delivered partially depending on the agreement. This can be done so as to reduce handling and storage costs. And in case of partial deliveries, they should be well recorded. So recording is very, very important. And issuing of the interim certificate should be done where possible. So you must be able to keep a record in the event you have partial deliveries. If partial deliveries were not permitted in the contract terms, the procuring entity may deal with the following ways. Number one, they check whether the load delivered meets the expectations or the expected standard, and record them and accept them as partial deliveries. They can also reject all the supplies and treat it as a breach of contract. So they can decide to reject all those items that came into the organization and say that that was a breach of contract. The procuring entity should ensure the following for them to be on the right side of the law. Number one, the partial delivery is not caused by the procuring entity failing to fulfill their obligation as outlined in the contract. So in the event the procuring entity is not part of what caused the partial delivery, therefore they can defend themselves in the court of law. They also make sure that the partial delivery is not a delay. So if it is a delay, then they can reconsider their decision. They also need to make sure that the delay was not caused by unforeseen events or circumstances. We have those situations that sometimes you are not planning for. And if that is the case, then they can defend themselves in the court of law. They also need to make sure that the clear clause forbidding partial delivery is in the contract. They must set a clause that talks about the partial delivery in the contract for them to defend themselves in a court of law. Then partial delivery should be able to demonstrate clear harm to the procuring entity. So in the event there are some issues of partial delivery, they must be clearly demonstrated so that the procuring entity should be able to clear the harm by ensuring this is not done into the organization. Inspection and acceptance of goods, works, and services under the low value procurement. All procurement of goods, works, or services usually fall under a prescribed matrix in the procurement contract. And the low value procurement is a procurement method that normally used when you are buying low value goods, works, or services, depending on the allocated threshold. It may be an amount of Kenyan shillings 30,000 or below, depending on the various classes of the procuring entity. So remember, the procuring entity are normally classified in various classes. We have class A, class B, and class C. The inspection and acceptance committee. The inspection and acceptance of low value procurement is usually done by the store officer, and his duties are as follows. Number one, they normally check and verify whether the goods, services, or works are complete or if it's a partial delivery. Number two, they also make sure that the quantities delivered are the right amount as stipulated in the low purchase order or the local service order. Then we have the inspecting of the goods or services or works delivered conform the specification in the purchase requisition. They also ensure that they make the delivery must be accompanied by the receiving note and that the user has verified it. So they must ensure that there is documentation that supports any actions. Then approving the goods, works, or services received by ensuring that they are approved in the received notes. They also ensure that anything or any function that is carried out is in their jurisdiction. This is because carrying out any function that may be required to do or make the inspection and acceptance committee that the goods and services are not successful. For consultancy services, a procuring entity can decide whether to appoint an inspection and acceptance committee for inspecting the procurement of consultancy services, or they can decide to delegate the duties to the contract. They can also ensure that the people responsible for inspection and acceptance of these consultancy services will be clearly stated in the request for proposal document. They also ensure that the inspection and acceptance committee or the contract administration team will carry out the following responsibility. Number one, they will ensure that the quantities delivered conform to the contract agreement where necessary. They also make sure that the user department has endorsed the service provider, has endorsed the service provided. So the user department must also be involved in all those aspects. The other thing is that they ensure that the procuring entity does not receive less quality than what was anticipated, and make sure that any other product other than the service that are to accompany the services have been delivered and they conform to the specification in the contract. And this may include the plans, the reports, the maps, or the manuals. Signing any relevant documents to ascertain that the inspection and acceptance has been carried out, and carrying out any other function that is included in the Public Procurement Oversight Authority Act. Thank you for listening. In case you feel you have any question, always feel free to ask.